Hello. Let me hide Okay, chapter 10, Huckleberry Ranch. Julian woke up the next morning to the sounds of a rooster crowing and breakfast cooking. He lay still for a moment, watching the motes of dust float through the sunshine coming in from skylight. He was in Robin's loft. This time yesterday he'd been in San Francisco, and now he was lying on a futon in a loft at Huckleberry Ranch. If he hadn't gone to Sibley's office that day, he would be at math camp right now, and Huckleberry Ranch would still be here with Bob and Robin and Nancy and Jojo, but he would never have met them. His mom was in China and she was meeting other people, people he would never know with lives just as real as his own. It was impossible to keep in your mind 6 billion people and each of them thinking his own life was the most real life. He sat up and stretched, then jumped back in surprise. 3 faces were staring at him. There was Snowball, crouched on the nightstand, looking like he was about to pounce. At the top of the staircase sat Jojo, looking solemn despite his jam-smeared face, and holding his hand was a girl with straight, pale orange hair and pale blue eyes with a pale freckled face. Even her eyelashes were pale orange. Julian, Jojo cried, only he pronounced it Julian. He turned to the girl. He's waking. He's not sleeping anymore. Julian rubbed his eyes. Are you Molly? He asked. She nodded and whispered something. What did you just say? Chore time, she whispered a little louder. Outside the air was cold and fresh. Robin was waiting for him on the steps. He followed her through the wet grass. It's my job to milk the goats this month, she said, lifting the latch on a small wooden barn. Immediately, 2 brown and black goats started pushing against her pocket. Stop, you greedy creatures, she pushed their heads away firmly. One bent its horns one bent its horns towards Julian, and he took a step back. Oh, Dolly won't hurt you, Robin said. She just has extremely poor manners. At the back of the barn, a small white goat stared mildly up at them. Her eyes were like marbles made of amber. Hello, Aphrodite, my little darling. Robin bent down and kissed the goat on the nose. Aphrodite's my very own. I raised her from a kid. Isn't she pretty? That's why I named her what I did. Julian didn't say anything. You know, Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of beauty. She gave Julian a smug look, then handed him a carrot from her pocket. The other 2 goats came rushing towards him. Dolly and Gracie, Robin said sternly, stop that immediately or I'm going to lock you up. The goats stopped. Julian held the carrot before Aphrodite's nose. She considered it with her trusting yellow eyes, then took it gently from his hands. My mom says she has the disposition of an angel, very ungoat like, Robin said, holding out another carrot. Aphrodite followed her to a small stand, and Robin fed her the carrot, then motioned Julian in and shut the door against the other goats. She placed a bucket of grain in front of Aphrodite, then wiped her udder with a damp cloth. Finally, she sat on a wooden stool and began to milk the little goat, who munched her grain contentedly. The jets of milk made a hard hissing sound in the bucket. Here now, you try, Robin said. There are 2 teats. Take 1 teat and squeeze from the top to the bottom. The word teat, which Robin said so casually, made Julian blush. He reached out for the closest one, squeezed, and nothing happened. Wait, stop, Julian said. Squeeze just the top, harder. Julian squeezed. Now work the milk down with your fingers, down towards your pinky. He tightened his grip, and a few drops of milk dripped into the bucket. Excellent. Very good for a beginner. Now let's let go and do it again. This time, a small spray of milk came out. Oh, you're a natural. Now a hand on each teat. back and forth. I've got to go milk Dolly and Gracie. They're more canticurious. Cantankerous. I don't know if that's correct, and I have no idea what that word is. Um, Julian could smell Aphrodite's warm animal smell. She seemed to be studying him with one striped golden eye. After a few clumsy dribbles, the milk began to squirt out in a steady rhythm. Steam rose from the bucket. Then somehow he lost his rhythm and the flow of milk stopped. He sat back on the stool and waited for Robin to return. How do you do? She said, stooping close beside Julian and reaching out to rub Aphrodite's udder. She grabbed the two teats, pulled vigorously, and more milk foamed into the bucket. Open your mouth, she ordered. By the time Julian realized what she was about to do, it was too late. The milk squirted into his mouth and dripped down his chin. The warm, goaty taste almost made Julian gag. That's disgusting. He spit the milk into the straw and wiped his chin with the back of his hand. Do we really have to drink this stuff, goat girl? It's good, city boy, Robin said. You'll get used to it. None of the city kids like it at first. Soon you'll be eating goat cheese, goat yogurt, goat ice cream. Goat ice cream. What would Danny say to that? Julian had a moment of nostalgia for the mint chocolate chip ice cream at the Toy Boat Dessert Cafe. When they came out when they came out into the yard, Molly was sitting with a tiny goat in her lap, feeding it with a glass bottle. It drank eagerly, paused for breath, then turned its little tan face towards the bottle again. That's Molly's baby, Robin said. She named her Bunny. Have you ever heard a stupider name for a goat? Do you want to feed her? Molly asked. Julian sat down on a stump in the yard, and Molly placed Bunny in his lap. The little goat crossed her delicate legs and tugged at the rubber nipple. When she'd finished guzzling down the milk, she lay her head on Julian's knee and he traced the soft fur on top of her head. Beneath his fingers, he could feel the outline of her tiny skull. By the time they had finished with the goats and gathered the warm and slightly dirty eggs from the chicken coop, Julian was starving. He wolfed down 5 of Nancy's blueberry pancakes before he remembered about the goat milk. But the pancakes were free of that unpleasant sour taste. She must have regular milk stashed away in her gigantic refrigerator, he figured. After breakfast, Nancy announced it was lesson time. You don't have summer vacation? Julian asked. No, we work like slaves all year long. Robin grumbled. I almost said that. We do take breakfast, Nancy said, wiping the table with a sponge, but we don't follow a regular school schedule. Exchange students don't have to do lessons, though. You're free to wander around. Julian spent the morning exploring. He found a cluster of apple trees, and beneath them, a deer with a spotted fawn, perhaps the same pair he'd seen from the road. The deer looked at him unafraid. Silently, he sent her a telepathic message saying, I won't hurt you, and she seemed to nod her head. Very slowly, he picked a small green apple off a low branch and held it out to her. The fawn took a few steps back, but the doe stretched her neck towards him. Her chin tickled his palm as she delicately lifted the apple and crunched it between her teeth. Julian wanted to touch her rough fur, but was afraid of frightening her. Even though he was careful not to move a muscle, she suddenly startled, bouncing off into the forest with the fawn close behind. Julian continued down the trail and found Bob by the vegetable garden. He was crouched down on his long legs, his face shaded by a wide brim hat. Do you need any help? Julian asked. We seem to have more weeds than vegetables so far. Do you ever weed a garden? Julian shook his head. Bob looked Julian up and down. Well, there's a first for everything. This is lettuce. He pointed to one row of the garden, and that's chard. Everything else is weeds. Weeds are bad. Crops are good. The lettuce had pale green, wrinkly leaves with a purple trim around the edges. They were no bigger than Julian's fist. The tall, grassy plants growing around the edges, Julian thought must be the weeds. He knelt in the dirt and broke a few off. Don't break them. Pull them from the roots, Bob said, keeping them from coming back so fast. Julian tried again. He grabbed another tall weed, but it broke off at the base. On the next try, he wiggled the plant slightly and lifted the spidery clump of roots easily out of the damp soil. That's better. Bob crouched beside him and they worked together until the warm under the warm sun. After a while, Julian could look down the rows and see each bright head of lettuce sitting in a clearing of brown soil. Ahead, the tiny lettuces were still choked in weeds. He finished the entire row and stood up to admire his work. Not bad, Bob said. Julian started on his second row. He worked a little faster now, but still couldn't keep pace with Bob, who moved tirelessly down one row after another. The sun began to burn on Julian's neck, and he was relieved when he heard the happy sound of the bell calling them to lunch. Let's get these weeds into the compost, Bob said. They carried the tangle of uprooted weeds over to a large black plastic canister. There'll be good dirt in a few months. In good farming, nothing's wasted. A family can work the same land forever if they do it right. They began walking towards the house. You're lucky to live here, Julian said. It's so green, not like the city. Bob looked towards the ridge line on the other side of the river. I'm a lucky man. Sometimes it's like the rest of the world doesn't even exist. My parents bought this land before I was born, $100 an acre. I helped my father build our house when I wasn't much older than you. Robin said you're going to build her own house. Julian was nearly running to keep up with Bob's giant strides down by the river. For the first time, Bob laughed. We've got the blueprints and everything. State of the art solar panels, water wheel, every piece of timber in Robin's house will come from this land. Same for Molly and the boys if that's what they want. My parents passed this land on to me, and when I'm gone, I'll pass it on to my kids. Maybe a little better than I found it. That's all the legacy I want. His father hadn't had time to leave much of a legacy, Julian thought. All he had of his father's was the ivory pocket knife and a white conch shell from Hawaii. The inside was glistening pink and smoother than glass. People always said if you held it to your ear, you could hear the ocean. But when Julian listened, all he heard was the sound of emptiness. At lunch, Julian had his fork nearly to his mouth when he realized the rest of the family was sitting silently with their heads bowed down. Even Jojo had his hands folded in his laps and his little eyes scrunched shut. Julian stopped, his fork clattering down on his plate. He waited nervously to see what they would do next, until at some unseen signal they all looked up and began passing around the food. All through lunch, Julian was quiet. Maybe he thought the elders could adopt him. But why would they want him? They already had three sons, although this was a gap just where he could fit in. Of course, he realized he already had a mother. Maybe he would just be a hired hand, like they had in the old westerns. One of those tough, quiet guys who, like a member of the family, ended up killing the rattlesnake in the nick of time and saving the children from a runaway horse. We do math after lunch, Nancy explained, when everybody had finished eating. We really should do it first thing in the morning, but like I said, Robin and I are procrastinators. She raised her voice to be heard over Jojo, who was holding a small plastic trunk and making loud zooming noises. I'm sorry to leave you on your own again, but Robin will be free soon. Julian stared at the bookshelves lining the living room, filled with serious looking volumes: the Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening, The Solar Home, Applied Silviculture and Forest Ecology, Small Scale Aquaculture. The girls had settled down at the kitchen table with worksheets and pencils, but Jojo kept holding the truck up to his mother and shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, I'm broken." And when no one responded, he called out, "I'm crying because no one will fix me." "If you want, I can take him out so you guys can concentrate," Julian said after a minute. "Oh, that would be great," Nancy smiled with relief. "You know, he used to just play quietly while we did our work, but now he's getting bored. Actually, he should be taking his nap, but he woke up later than usual this morning." Julian knelt down in front of Jojo. "Hey, Jojo, want to go down by the creek? You can bring your truck and dig a hole in the dirt," Robin coaxed. She brought him a pair of tiny bathing trunks covered with green frogs. "I'll put on your swimsuit. You can bring your truck and dig a hole in the dirt," Robin. Oh, sorry, I read the sentence again. Julian followed Jojo down to the pebbly bank. He sat on a log while Jojo happily pushed his bulldozer around and made beeping noises. Jojo made a few holes with his bulldozer and then stood up and put his toes in the water. "Can I go in?" he asked with a grave face. Sure," Julian said. The afternoon sun was warm. "Don't go in too far." Julian walked along the side of the bank, laughing and splashing. He found a stick and banged it on the water. Then he cried, "Charge!" and started running all about. "I'm charging the monsters," he yelled. He rushed wildly into the creek and crashed face down into the water. Julian sprang up and grabbed him by his slippery shoulders. Jojo was crying loud, and water streaming down from his hair into his contorted little face. "Don't cry, Jojo. It's okay. Don't cry," Julian said. "I'm bleeding," Jojo sobbed. "Let me see. Show me. Come on, show me. I'll fix it." There, Jojo pointed to his knee. Underneath the mud, Julian could see the skin was broken and there was a small speck of blood. Julian looked back at the house but nobody was coming. Maybe they hadn't heard the cries. "I want my mama," Jojo wailed. "Mama's inside." Julian was determined to show Nancy that he could at least handle a 3-year-old. "We're going to wash off the blood, and then we're going to make a dam with your truck and damp up the creek with mud." The words truck and dam and mud worked like magic. Jojo stopped crying. Julian took him to the creek and splashed water on his knee until the mud and the blood were gone. "Okay," Julian said, "let's get started." Um, Jojo seemed to understand that Julian was committed to entertaining him. He demanded that Julian use the tiny truck to move all the mud and dirt that he built, and that he build the walls of the dam higher and higher. When the water began to spill over the dam, Jojo would shriek, "Julian, the water's coming, hurry!" And Julian would rush to reinforce the crumbling wall. After what felt like hours, he heard Nancy's laugh behind him. "Well, you're a sight," she said. Julian looked at Jojo. His blonde curls were already dry, and the scrape on his right knee was barely visible. Julian, on the other hand, was a mess. His shirt was soaked, his pants were filthy, and he was muddy up to his elbow. "I think you found a friend, Julian," Nancy said. "Now he'll never leave you alone." She rewarded his efforts with a chocolate chip cookie, then led him to the outdoor shower. "It's solar heated," she said. "There should be plenty of hot water. We usually shower outside, except in the coldest months." Julian had never taken a shower outside. With the sky and the trees all around, at least there were wooden walls on all sides. The only part of him that would be visible from the outside would be his feet. When he finished, he wrapped a towel around his waist and, still dripping, hurried up to the loft where he discovered Robin lying on his futon reading. "Hey," Julian said. "Ah, a naked intruder," Robin cried. "Get out of here." Robin scooted, laughing, down the spiral stairs, and Julian quickly pulled on his clothes. A minute later, her face reappeared at the top of the stairs, eyes shut tight. "It's okay," Julian said. "You can come up now." Robin threw herself back on the futon. "Thank goodness you're decent." "How is school?" Julian said to change the subject. "Okay, except for having to listen to Jojo scream like somebody was torturing him." I was not. He fell in the creek. If you guys heard him, why didn't you come and get him? Mom thought you could handle it. It wasn't what she calls his bloody murder scream. Mom thought you could. Oh, sorry. So much for impressing Nancy, Julian looked over at the computer sitting on a desk in the far corner of the loft. Lowering his voice, he said, maybe I should check in with Danny. I told him I let him know if I got here okay. This is the only computer, Robin said quietly, turning it on. Mom and Dad hardly ever use it. They let me get my own email account so I could write to Ariel. She's my best friend. She used to live down the road, but then she moved to Phoenix. They waited for the computer to warm up, then Robin clicked into her email. Looks like there's a new message from Lopez. June 15. Hey, Jimmy, Carter Lee, and Robin Hood. Just checking in and letting you know that I'm holding down the fort, available for logistical support on an as-needed basis. What's happening in Redwood City? Any dirt on Mr. CEO? How is the Greyhound? All's quiet on the home front. Please delete this email and do not attempt to print it, or a hidden virus will erase your hard drive. Danny. Danny seems like kind of a crazy guy, Robin said. Julian shrugged. No, he's not. He just likes to be funny. Can I write him back? Robin stood up and Julian took her seat. He wrote, June 15. Dear Danny, arrived here safe. Everything according to the plan. Well, pretty much. Robin's family is great and the ranch is really great too. Operation Redwood still undecided. Sleep on it. What are you talking about? Robin asked, reading over his shoulder. What's the plan and what's Operation Redwood? Well, the plan was getting me here instead of math camp, getting away from Sibley, figuring out where you live, finding the right bus schedule, the whole exchange student thing. Operation Redwood isn't really a plan yet. We were just trying to figure out if there was some way to help you, to keep my uncle from cutting down Big Tree Grove. Julian paused. I don't get it. In school, we're always studying the rainforest in Brazil and Africa, and people are always trying to get you to petition to save the rainforest and buy special rainforest nuts. And we never learned anything about people cutting down redwoods in California. I mean, can my uncle really just cut down all those trees? Isn't it illegal? Robin looked at him in disbelief. Obviously, it's not illegal. Where do you think all the trees went that used to grow on Huckleberry Ranch? But that was a long time ago. She shook her head. I showed you those stumps by the road. All you need to log is a timber harvest plan, a THP, and your uncle's already got that. There are some rules you have to follow, like you have to replant, and maybe there'll be certain trees they won't let you cut down, but it's private property. You can pretty much do what you want. That night, Julian read Jojo his bedtime story. In return, he received a slightly spitty goodnight kiss. As he lay in his futon in the loft, Julian felt that he had somehow traveled farther that day that he had on the long bus ride the day before. He'd milked a goat, explored Huckleberry Ranch on his own, walked along a river, and even fed a deer. It wasn't even 9 o'clock, and he lay awake for a long time, looking up at the stars through the skylight. In San Francisco, the sky was usually hidden by thick fog or clouds. On clear nights, there might be a handful of indifferent stars scattered in the sky, some of which would turn into airplanes homing in on San Francisco, homing in on San Francisco airport. But here the bright stars shone out on the bright black night like the glittering eyes of some watchful spirit. Julian had never seen stars like this. He hadn't known this was how stars were supposed to be. And that is the end of chapter 10. Good job.